I am Johnny Detroit, People's Champ. I'm with Greg Shake and Bake Shaker, the man with the biggest head at pregame. And what we're going to do today, it's going to be 30 minutes. We're going to talk totals. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can at 6 o'clock Eastern. Usually we go 5 minutes in before we technically start to give everyone a chance to log in and make sure everything's working. If you have any questions, use the question module, send those in. Do me a favor, Greg. Can you babble for like 30 seconds? I want people to hear and make sure that me and you both sound fine. And for all of you who are logged in right now using the module, if you can give me a little feedback using the chat option and let us know how the volume is. I know we've had some audio issues, and the problem is with people having to either use their computer or by phone, and based off how good everyone's internet connection is, we've had a lot of audio issues lately, it seems, and it just kind of really pisses me off because I try keeping this as professional as possible. So, Greg, I guess you're babbling so people could test the audio. Give me like 30 seconds of some main things you're going to want to go over.
Okay. Hopefully you guys can hear me. We're going to talk a lot about totals. I've got a lot of good things, some specifics and some generals. I know that some people handicap totals and some people don't. Some people want to. Some people can't. Some people do very, very good at it. In fact, I don't know why the hell I'm doing this seminar, considering that Scotty Dog appears to be the total handicapper guy pregame now.
Yeah,
so we're going to talk about pace. What?
Yeah. He has some respect for you. He actually shot me an email, and I was going to surprise everybody. I exchanged emails with Scott earlier, was going to try putting him on the webinar to give his feedback, and he was pissed because he had to work. So the first question I'm going to get to is going to be his. So what we're going to do first, let's get right to the meat and potatoes. Greg, you are known as a totals guy across all sports. A lot of people don't know this, is our relationship in terms of friendship, not that kind, predates pregame by many, many years. We've known each other for a long time. And quick little true story is when we were trying to grow the pregame pro ranks, RJ came to me and said, do you know anybody that you think would be a good fit? And one of the first people I thought of was you. And, here we are like 6 years later doing a webinar together. So let's get to the meat and potatoes, Greg. 30 minutes. I want to at least get 10 minutes or so of Q&A. If anyone asks questions while Greg's presenting that pertains to what he's talking about, we'll go right into that. The reason you're seeing these pop-ups is because one of the things we get to the Q&A, I want to give some examples of Greg looking at some games today of some things he would look for, and I want to use the line service, so that's going to be up right now. Greg, the floor is yours, sir. Betting totals, first semester, 101. We're in your class. How do you start the year off right?
I'm sorry, what now? You're asking me a question.
You're the teacher. We're the students.
Okay, I know.
It's the first day of class. What are you going to teach us?
That's where I'm going from.
Right.
I'm going to assume that nobody knows anything, and we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to talk just basically and briefly about some terms, including pace. I know that that's something that I talk about a lot. Pace, or I think it's called Pace Factor as well. You can find these at kimpon.com. I personally don't use that site because I keep my own pace, but that's a good one for somebody that does not have their own pace ratings. And basically, and then there's also Hollinger, which you can find on ESPN.com. He does a very good job with the NBA. Pace simply is the number of possessions that a team uses per game. It's that simple. Now, that's can be very, very low or very, very high. It just means how many times they touch the ball, simply. We're going to look at offensive efficiency, which is the number of points a team scores per 100 possessions. And then we're going to look at defensive efficiency, which is the number of points a team allows per 100 possessions. Now, that's pretty simple stuff, but the fact is there is pace, and then there is what I call expected pace. Just because a team is pacing high doesn't mean that they're going to do that every game. And in fact, in certain situations, they simply are not. If a team that paces low, it doesn't mean that they're always going to pace low. I put college basketball, and we are going to talk primarily about college basketball with the tournaments coming up, and hopefully I believe that Chris and the other sports books are going to be putting up all the totals for the tournament. I would assume that they would do so. Gosh, I hope. I put teams in three categories, and then probably you could add another one, but I basically put them in slow, fast, and what I call play along. Play along teams are teams that really don't have a pace. They pretty much assume the pace of whoever they're playing. One team that we can look at that does this a lot is Butler. And in fact, Butler plays UMass tomorrow, and already they've set that line at 144. That's a very high total for a Butler game, but the fact is UMass does play a high pace, and even the books have spotted this phenomenon with Butler, and they've set that line pretty high at 144, and probably going to be a pretty close to the number, so I probably will lay off that. There's other things that create pace and things that create non-pace. We can look at basketball teams, and we can determine that generally a team at home will control the pace. Now, it's important to note that a team that is, say, a 0 to -5 or -7 favorite may or may not control the pace as well as if they were a 10 to 13 point favorite or even higher than that. And just to give you an example of what I mean by that, I've actually just off the top of my head today picked North Carolina. And in going through some of their games this year, they have been favored by 10 or more, I think on 9 or 10 occasions. And I'm not exactly sure about that. I do know that the last 7 out of 9 times they have gone over the total when they have been favored by more than 10 points. And the reason is simple. North Carolina likes to get up and down the court. If it is a close game, they're less likely to do that. Teams don't really want to run with North Carolina, or at least not many of them do. But as a prohibitive underdog, generally they have to at some point during the game. And sure enough, like I said, in some of those games, for instance, we can look at favored by 14.5 over Wake Forest. That game went over. Favored by 11 over Georgia Tech. That game went way over. Maryland, once again, I'm sorry, not Maryland. McNeese State, East Carolina, Chaminade, Mississippi State. All of these were big favorites. And in all those situations, North Carolina took the lead, took the pace, and that game went over. And you take a team like Denver, for instance, who is also a -10, -13 favorite, say over, and I'm just going to pick, I didn't actually look at and see their schedule, but let's say they're playing Rice. They're going to be a big favorite at home. And if they get a big lead at halftime, they are generally going to slow down the pace even further. They're going to milk the clock. And so a home and away situation is something that I look forward to, something that I look toward. And, in fact, I know a lot of people use numbers like so-and-so averages 74 points a game. They give up 63 points a game. I simply throw that out the door because, number one, you have to determine what that means and how many low-paced teams, say a high-paced teams play. And, number two, the home and away differential is such that I only use home stats when a team is at home, and I only use road stats when a team is on the road. Now, there's a lot of situations that will take that away from us, and that would be what I consider a rival game. Now, in a rival game, very often we're going to see lower pace because we're also going to see higher defensive efficiency and defensive intensity. I think I had a game, I can't remember what it was last week, where that came into play. I think the total was like 143 or something like that. I think it was 121 points scored in the game, even though both teams showed a very high pace. Another thing that I look for is teams, and of course that goes directly against the rival versus rival, teams that don't play each other very often. And I think that most people know already that bracket buster games are games that go over at a very, very high rate, and they have done so for the last 5 years. Well, that's the perfect example. when Wichita State plays VCU, these teams don't play very often. They're also not on TV very often, and so they want to show their stuff, and there is no real rival situation there, so there's not going to be as much defensive intensity, and therefore you're going to have more than likely higher pace in some of those ball games and a higher percentage of those games going over. We are going to talk about tournament totals in particular because they are absolutely a totally different animal. I think a lot of people think that tournament totals go over more than they go under, but it's actually not the case. And in fact, I have been chatting with a pretty sharp guy on Twitter. Jason Stone is his name. I think his Twitter name is The Real, as in THEREAL _HBC. I probably got that wrong. Anyway,
you tried to give him a plug. That's nice of you.
Yeah, I think it's HBC, but I can't remember. But anyway, Jason Stone, a lot of you probably already know him. Tournaments are really different from conference to conference. And I use a lot of databases. And one of the things that I do is I look at different conferences and see how those conference tournaments go. The Missouri Valley Conference is one that has been an extraordinary under opportunity for, I believe, 4 years now. Betting every single game under, and the Missouri Valley Conference would have netted you 26 wins and 10 losses for betting first halves. Second halves, 25 out of 36 have gone under, and also 26 games have gone under out of 36 for the entire game. And if for some reason the first half went over, seven of those 9 games that went over, or I'm sorry, 7 of those 10 games that went over, went under in the second half. Now, I don't know exactly why that is. It could be that even though the Missouri Valley Conference is a smaller conference, those teams have been in that conference for a long time. These teams don't like each other. It's just one of those conferences where just about everybody is a rival against everybody. That's the only thing that I can deduct from that. But you can look at the Pac-10. The Pac-10 is totally different. Tournament totals just fly over constantly every year in and year out. Now, we're going to look at March Madness shortly, but that's what I've got so far. I do have some other stuff. Any questions at this point would be wonderful.
Yeah, there's actually a couple. The first one is in regards to halftime totals. What are some tips on how to handicap those? You know, and I kind of want to ask a question to kind of parlay off that, so don't forget the main question. My question is I see what you're saying with pace and whatnot, but, you know, I've talked to odds makers, and when they create those second half totals, a lot of it's based off the game line, obviously, and a lot of it's automated. Do you think that there's any edge in betting half times, whether you're watching the game or certain situations? If I had to give you my money and said, tell me how to bet half times, what are some really good tips you'd give me on betting half times?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah. Well, first of all, you know, most halftime totals are automated. I think that generally the first half total is, if I'm not mistaken, about 45% of the game total, and then the second half total would be about 55% of the game total. And so, yeah, they are pretty much. By the way, it's he just tweeted me. It is The Real _HBC. That's his Twitter name, Jason. Thank you, Jason.
He's like, damn it. He goes, this is going to be all over pregame. I want my props.
I'm telling you. What I do, and honestly, it's something that Jason actually told me. I'm actually looking into that. I mean, there's all sort of situations, and I think that's what wins more than anything on halftime totals, is knowing the situation of the game, and certainly whatever the halftime lead is in the game. Based on what we talked about just moments ago, teams again at home generally control the pace. If a team at home has a large lead at halftime, they will usually get to play the way that they want to play in the second half. So, looking at, say, for instance, last night at TCU and Kansas State. Well, we know about TCU. They like to play very low pace. Kansas State, about medium, but we had, I think, a 13 or 14-point halftime lead by Kansas State. TCU was forced into playing Kansas State style because they wanted to get back in the game, and the second half over was extraordinarily easy. And again, using the example that I've already used, say, if Bryce is playing Denver and Rice is trailing by 20 at halftime, which is altogether possible, there's a good likelihood that game is going to go under the total. Honestly, that's one of the biggest things that I use. A close game at halftime is one that I will look toward the under, simply because teams in close games will play a little bit, I guess, tighter to the belt in the second half. But still, it's a lot of it is based on the number. Jason has something that he does, and that's when he sees a game go way over on the first half total in a game that is lined very low, let's say a 122 game, and we've got 73 points at halftime. He will play under that total in the second half, and he has been extraordinary doing this. In fact, he's pointed out numerous games. He'll tweet me and say, play under on this game, and it works, from what I've seen. I haven't really looked at that myself, but that's something that I probably will look into.
Devil's advocate from me to you, what you just said about a close game, is that I'm by no means a halftime expert, so this isn't like my theory versus yours. It's just me, being an amateur and trying to I understand the basics of halftimes, how they're made, whatnot, and I have bet them and I use them to get off bets. But a game that's usually close, aren't you a little concerned in a close game, though, that those final couple minutes turns into fouls or overtime? In a game where a team's up, over the 7 or 8 threshold when they're not following, you got a better shot at least towards, the last couple minutes of the game, that it's going to be shoot, hold the ball, rather than shoot, score, foul, throws, shoot, score, foul. I've seen games that had no business going over, put up 20 points in 3 minutes. I mean, do you factor that in, or do you think that's such an anomaly that, for the game to be close at half and then also stay close through the final minute or so to the point that someone's going to have to foul, such a rare occurrence, you don't factor that in?
Well, I do, and it does, and trust me, that has cost me a lot of games this year. Anytime you bet under, you worry about that the last a couple or 3 minutes. A 2 to 3 possession game generally is not going to see that. A 4 possession game or more is probably going to see a lot of fouling down the end. Now, you're going to get a fouling in the last minute of the ball game in every game where there's more than one possession. But you can usually withstand that 1 minute. Withstanding 3 or 4 minutes of that is tough to do. I know I lost to Florida State and Virginia Tech. I think I had under 146, and I believe they scored like 37 points in the last 2 minutes and 41 seconds. I mean, my goodness. But it's mainly because Florida State was down by 12 to 13 points. Actually, on close games that are going to be, in that 5 to 6 point range, you don't usually get that fouling until about a minute to go in the game, and generally that's not gonna hurt you.
This is not basketball related, but considering the run he's on, and we have about 10 minutes left, if I don't get his question in, I think it's just bad karma. It's from Scotty Dog, And you gotta show that you have respect there, Greg, when a guy who's rattling off wins like that is asking a question for the webinar. So,
yeah,
Greg, how do you factor ballpark size, umps, and ERA when figuring MLB totals? And what are some good places to get stats on ballparks and umpires?
Well, I wish I'd brought my stuff with me. Okay, what were those three things? I need to write those down. Umps.
Well, it's a twofold question. How do you factor ball size, umps, and ERA when you're doing your totals? Are those factors that you consider?
ERA?
Ballpark size, umps,
Right, I got it.
ERA.
Oh, well, ballpark is very important, especially the weather. There are some parks where, regardless of what the weather is, if it's got the number that I like, I'm going to play over, or if it's or under, depending on the situation. ERA, I mean, obviously you have to look at pitchers, but I look certainly more at the last 3 or 4 games of a pitcher than I do, and I also look at situations of the pitcher. I know that a lot of people also look at pitcher stats as opposed to they've done well against this team or they haven't done well against this team. I think it's best, and it's what I do, is I look a little deeper into the numbers. Obviously, you can have a very poor pitching performance against a team, but it's not necessarily the right thing to look at because, well, just let me give you a for instance. Let's say that Chad Billingsley has pitched against whoever, Houston, for 6 games, and he's sporting an ERA of 5.95. Well, you can look at that and you can go, well, he just can't pitch against Houston. But if you look a little further, it's important to look at each individual game that he's thrown against Houston. He may have had a horrible outing and given up 8 runs in 2 innings, and he may have 3 shutouts. So, things happen. I mean, pitchers are weird animals. I was a pitcher in high school myself, and I know that sometimes, I could just blow everybody away, and sometimes I couldn't do crap. But it doesn't mean that you're necessarily bad against that particular team, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're bad against that team when you're at home. You may have dominated that team at home as opposed to on the road, and so that's what. I could do a whole new show on pitching and how to look at pitchers, but the fact is you can't just look at the stats. So you can't just look at the ERA. You can't just look at a particular pitcher's performance against a particular team.
And real quick, Scotty.
But we can do a webinar about that. I'll be ready for that.
Yeah, when baseball season comes back on, I'd love to have you on because I'm someone who has really taken a tune just because I knew a guy that was taking some action from these guys that were technically what they were college kids who were going to school to be weathermen or, deal with weather, and they were killing them in totals. And Scotty Dog, my advice, you can skim through the book for what you need because a lot of it's more on just actual baseball, but there's a lot of really cool points. It's a book called The Physics of Baseball. It was written by a physics professor from Yale, I believe what school he was from. I know it was one of the Ivy League schools. His name is Robert Adair, Adair. And I will tell you this, I have seen on a lot of sites and forums from people that think that they're sharp when they say things about the weather and humidity and whatnot, that they're so ass backwards on what that really means. And his book goes over some amazing stuff. And there are some sports weather sites that you can go to that will literally show you where the stadium is situated, compared to where the wind's coming in, and then it break down the humidity and wind throughout every hour. And to use that on some 5-inning stuff or whatnot is just, it's almost like gold. But we'll do a whole nother baseball one. I want to get to a few more questions.
Well, I'd like to see that, JD. Can you send that to me?
I'm
going to be doing a number of threads on Major League Baseball total handicapping as we get close. And, of course, we're close right now.
Oh, but, yes, we are. It's like the Super Bowl every year in our area for the opening day. Me and the old lady, since we've been together 10 plus years, we go every year to opening day, and she's already online trying to find what she's got her tiger, some unique tiger gear she could wear to like not have the generic jersey. Next question, Greg. How do you calculate possessions?
How do you calculate possession?
Yes.
Well, like I said, possession basically is the number of times you touch a ball. I mean, it's a per game possession. I mean, yeah, per game possessions. I mean, you touch the ball 64 times, then you've got 64 possessions. It doesn't matter whether or not you have that ball for 3 seconds or 30 seconds.
Next question. Do situational spots hold on. Do situational spots be factored into I'm guessing he's saying should situational spots be factored into handicapping totals? Like, do you factor in if a team won a huge game last time out or have a huge game on deck? If a team may be flat, would that affect their offense or defense more?
Well, I really don't factor in situations because a flat team is going to be flat both offensively and defensively.
Great.
There are certain situations, though, that would lend itself to, again, a lower scoring game, and that's when, you have an important game for both teams. I mean, the fact is tonight I've got VCU and Richmond under 64 for the first half. That is those two teams they get after it, and in fact, I mean, part of my reasoning was the fact that VCU probably, who is the faster paced team, is probably going to be a little bit down tonight after their monstrous win over Butler, and so in that particular case, yeah, that would be a situation where you would look at a team that was off a big win. That's not always the case, though, because again, if their next game, which of course, like I said, is Richmond tonight, was not against a team that they would consider a big rival, then that would not necessarily be the case. I guess it all sort of works all together, and in this situation, I think we got a good shot at the under 64. And by the way, I do have a couple of picks tonight.
Oh, you want to share some free picks?
Yeah. What the heck?
What the hell? Go ahead.
Well, I couldn't pick these for my clients, and so I thought I'd go ahead and throw them out. We actually talked about, again, a situation where we have a high-paced team with a high spread at home, and we are talking about Rice and Houston. Now, this game is not owned everywhere, and so if you have 5 Dimes or Bet Phoenix or Bet Online, that total is 145.5. I know that Rice is absolutely pathetic, but Houston's defense is also pathetic. They are, though, a 12.5 to 13-point favorite. That total 145.5, and I think that game's going to go over the total. I can't pick that for my clients, so I can throw it out on here because it's not widely available. The other game would be a similar situation. That's going to be Florida and Vanderbilt, 19-point spread, a very low total. I think it's 118. I'm trying to find it. Yeah, it's 118, again, at 5 Dimes and Bet Phoenix and I believe Bet Online. 19-point favorite at home, Florida. They're going to control the pace. My goodness, they might score, 100 by themselves. So there's that particular situation we talked about where you've got a heavy favorite at home and you've got a situation where they're going to probably control the pace and control the game. So there's your couple of free picks.
Last question, and there's a bunch we can't get to, but it's my company, so I'm going to give the last one to myself. Going into the conference tournaments, I heard what you mentioned earlier. I'm going to leap forward to the big dance. There's always stuff that based off the travel or, playing in different size stadiums for the smaller schools, like a lot of stuff that people look at situational. And I know, most of the stuff you talked about has been mathematical, possessions and scoring and stuff that, 2 + 2 = 4 versus I guess you'd call it a raw handicap. For the big dance, is there anything per round or based on the school? So say like Podunk U versus a Duke, that historically is something, regardless what your math says, you'll lean a certain way.
I'm not sure I understood that question, JD. Can you, in other words, is there a certain game that I'm going to play a certain way every time, regardless of anything?
For example, like in the regular season, you're using your math, you're using your pace ratings. Come the big dance, a lot of that has to be thrown out of the window because it's a totally different situation. There's, the week break between the end of the conference, title game. And for a team that didn't have a conference title game on that Sunday, their title game could have been 8-9 days ago. So they might not be playing a game for almost 2 weeks, which during the regular season, no team goes 2 weeks without playing. So what factors do you put more emphasis on for the big dance that you wouldn't in the regular season or vice versa? Do you see what I'm saying?
Regular season versus tourneys?
I'm talking the big dance, because there's that whole break between Selection Sunday and a lot of these smaller conferences, they're starting their conference tournaments now. So some of these teams, if they make the tournament, they might not be playing a legitimate game for up to 2 weeks. So, for example, say you have a team with your pace rating and your math or in the regular season would be a clear-cut over. Using those numbers, but they have a 2-week layoff, they're traveling, and they're playing Duke. What do you still use those numbers, or would you change or look at something different because it's the big dance?
Well, number one, I don't use the big dance is totally different than the regular season. So I don't really use those numbers anyway. They can be a reference point, but neutral site basketball games is just a totally different animal. In fact, I would say this, and it's probably because of what you saw over in the first week of the tournament has been money over the last 3 years. In 2010, I think they were 18-14 under. 2011, 19-11 and 1, I believe. 19-11 and I can't remember. And 2012, 19-12 and 1. Basically, about 59% of the games go under, and that's probably because, again, it's an important game, and so there's going to be more defensive intensity, and because there has been a layover. In fact, I think last year, all line games at 140 or more, there were 9 that were lined at 140 or more in the first round of March Madness. 7 went under, and very close to 8 of them went under. So I do believe that teams will suffer offensively, but they'll also pick up defensively because they're able to look at their first opponent much longer, study films much longer, and be more prepared.
Greg, great stuff as always. I want to say thanks to everyone who took the time. We went over a couple minutes, but with the big dance up and coming, I felt it was important. I'm going to have Greg back for sure once we get closer to baseball season to talk baseball totals and handicapping. For anyone who partook in this webinar, I want to say not only thanks, I'm going to give you a free $10. Next 72 hours, any purchase, it could be the dollar, it could be the daily, 7, seasonal, whatever you decide. Coupon code SHAKE10, SHAKE 10, will take $10 off any one purchase. Greg, great stuff. Great stuff. I want to know from me to you, is there anything you want to add before we close it out?
Not at all. I'm just very happy to be here and hope we can do it again.
Well, thanks. I appreciate everyone who's here. And as always, the people's champ, from you to me and me back to you, best of luck.